All right, chapter 9, the game made. So in the last chapter, I love was one of my favorite plot twists about si Barsade ay being the brother of Miss Pross, who she kept talking about ever since the beginning. It even mentioned when it first introduced, I think book two, it mentioned that si Miss Pross good wanted um, Lucy to end up with her brother Solomon Pross, and we find out that Solomon Pross is actually John Barsad. I That's one of my favorite plot twists, and we had that cool scene where Carton, who by the way is also in France now, and save will try to save Lucy's family. It shows what a jackal he is good and how skilled he is at debate or at negotiating. At He's using good his skills and powers to find a way to free the man that Lucy loves. All right, so that's where we are now, and then we know in the last in chapter 8 ended nga Carton and Barsad or Solomon Pross entered a room, just the two of them. They left Cruncher and they left Cruncher and Mr. Lorry outside. Oh, by the way, also Cruncher, very important, right? What's very important with Cruncher is he added kind of like the additional testimony and proof, because when he opened the coffin of Clay, it was empty. So again, as I mentioned with the last chapter, Miss Pross and Jerry Cruncher, they really came off as very cartoonish, kind of comic relief characters in the beginning, but now it's proving kaayo nga they're so important to the plot, and they become essential characters the closer we get to the end of the book. Okay? Chapter 9, The Game Made. While Sidney Carton and the sheep of the prisons were in the adjoining dark room, speaking so low that not a sound was heard, Mr. Lorry looked at Jerry in considerable doubt and mistrust. That honest tradesman's manner of receiving the look did not inspire confidence. He changed the leg on which he rested as often as if he had 50 of those limbs and were trying them all. He examined his fingernails with a very questionable closeness of attention, and whenever Mr. Lorry's eye caught his, he was taken with that peculiar kind of short cough requiring the hollow of a hand before it, which is seldom, if ever, known to be an infirmity attendant on perfect openness of character. Jerry, said Mr. Lorry, come here. Mr. Cruncher came forward sideways with one of his shoulders in advance of him. What have you been besides a messenger? After some cogitation, accompanied with an intent look at his patron, Mr. Cruncher conceived the luminous idea of replying, agricultural character. My mind misgives me much, said Mr. Lorry, angrily shaking a forefinger at him, that you have used the respectable and great house of Tellson's as a blind, and that you have had an unlawful occupation of an infamous description. If you have, don't expect me to befriend you when you get back to England. If you have, don't expect me to keep your secrets. Telson shall not be imposed upon. So we know Mr. Lorry loves Telson so much. Telson's is his family, Telson's is his home, and he is very angry with Jerry Cruncher for kind of just using Telson's as an honorable front for his unlawful grave digging. I hope, sir, pleaded the abashed Mr. Cruncher, that a gentleman like yourself, what I've had the honour of odd jobbing till I'm grey at it, would think twice about harming of me, even if it was so, I don't say, but even if it was, and which it is to be took into account that if it was, it wouldn't, even then, be all of one side. There'd be two sides to it. There might be medical doctors at the present hour picking up your guineas, where honest tradesmen don't pick up his fardens. Fardens, no, nor yet his half fardens, no, nor yet his quarter, a banking away like smoke at Tellson's, and a cocking their medical eyes at that tradesman on the sly, a going in and going out to their own carriages, equally like smoke, if not more so. Well, that you'd be imposing a too on Tellson's, for you cannot sares the goose and not the gardener, and here's Mr. Cruncher, or at least ways was in the old England times, and would be tomorrow. If cause given, a flopping again the business to that degree as is ruinating, stark ruinating, whereas the medical doctors' wives don't flop, catch 'em at it. Or if they flop, their floppings goes in favor of more patients. And how can you rightly have one without the other? Then what with undertakers, and what with parish clerks, and what with sextons, and what with private watchmen, all avaricious and all in it. A man wouldn't get much by it. Even if it was so, and what little a man did get would never prosper with him, Mr. Lorry. He'd never have no good of it. He'd want all along to be out of the line, if he could see his way out, being once in, even if it was so. Ah, cried Mr. Lorry, rather relenting. Nevertheless, I am shocked at the sight of you. Now, what I would humbly offer to you, sir, pursued Mr. Cruncher, even if it was so, which I don't say it is, don't prevaricate, said Mr. Lorry. No, I will not, sir, returned Mr. Cruncher, as if nothing were further from his thoughts or practice, which I don't say it is. What I would humbly offer to you, sir, would be this. Upon that there stool at that there bar sets that there boy of mine, brought up and growed up to be a man, what will errand you, message you, general light job you, till your heels is where your heads is. If such should be your wishes, if it was so, which I still don't say it is, for I will not prevaricate to you, sir. Let that there boy keep his father's place, and take care of his mother. Don't blow upon that boy's father. Do not do it, sir. And let that father go into the line of that irregular digging, and make amends for what he would have undug, if it was so, by digging of him, and with a will, and with convictions respecting the future keeping of him safe. But Mr. Lorry, said Mr. Cruncher, wiping his forehead with his arm as an announcement that he had arrived at the peroration of his discourse, is what I would respectfully offer to you, sir. A man don't see all this here agoing on dreadful round him, in the way of subjects without heads, dear me, plentiful enough for to bring the price down to porterage and hardly that, without having his servious thoughts of things. And these here would be mine, if it was so entreating of you, to fur to bear in mind that what I said just now I up and said in the good cause when I might have kept it back. Okay, so this is important. I know Cruncher isn't the best speaker. So his dialogue is confusing and all over the place, and it's not even grammatically correct. It's not even spelled right. But the thing with Cruncher is, in this moment, we see that someone like Cruncher does have a little bit of honor in him pa. Because when Mr. Lorry said, nga, I will never hire you again. If we get back to England, you're never going to have a job again. And his reaction is actually honorable, guys. He says, nga, please still give my son a job. Still give my son work. Please still give my son opportunity to take care of his wife, and please give me an opportunity to make right my wrongs also. Like, I want to make right my wrongs. I want to find a way nga I will undo the damage. I will undo the things that I did. Okay? And then he said, Pagud, and please take into consideration that I didn't have to reveal what I knew. Murag, in revealing, in helping out Carton and Darnay, I kind of ruined myself in revealing that I was a grave digger. So please take into account that I didn't have to do that, but I did it because I thought it was the right thing. So I love it. I love that Dickens put this part in because see, Cruncher isn't just this abusive jerk. Okay, he's actually he's a human being good, and he has his flaws, but he also has his moments of honor. And I think this is really 3 pages that show Cruncher. It gives him depth. Okay. That at least is true, said Mr. Lorry. Say no more now. It may be that I shall yet stand your friend, if you deserve it, and repent in action, not in words. I want no more words. Mr. Cruncher knuckled his forehead as Sidney Carton and the spy returned from the dark room. Adieu, Mr. Barsad, said the former, our arrangement thus made, you have nothing to fear from me. He sat down in a chair on the hearth over against Mr. Lorry. When they were alone, Mr. Lorry asked him what he had done. Okay, so Mr. Lorry is like, what did you talk about? It was just the two of you. Not much. If it should go ill with the prisoner, I have insured access to him once. Mr. Lorry's countenance fell. It is all I could do, said Carton. To propose too much would be to put this man's head under the axe. And as he himself said, nothing worse could happen to him if he were denounced. It was obviously the weakness of the position. There is no help for it. But access to him, said Mr. Lorry, if it should go ill before the tribunal, will not save him. I never said it would. Mr. Laurie's eyes gradually sought the fire. His sympathy with his darling and the heavy disappointment of the second arrest gradually weakened them. He was an old man now, overborne with anxiety of late, and his tears fell. I'm so happy I got this chapter. Okay, so he asked Carton, what did you talk about? What did you decide on? And Carton said nga, we agreed that if Darnay is found guilty, I will be able to I will be able to see him once, okay? And Mr. Lawyer said that won't save him. Carton said, "It's like I'm not trying to save him. Like if he's found guilty, I know I never said I would be able to save him. But at least if he is found guilty, I can meet him one more time before his execution in order maybe to get the last few messages from for Lucy, for his family. So at least he'll have one more contact with the outside world after the trial. If he is found guilty, he can meet up with Carton one more time before he's executed, and Carton can deliver anything he might want to say to his family, to his loved ones. Okay? So this kind of opened Mr. Laurie's eyes nga. Oh man, if Darnay is found guilty, then there's no hope. Murag, there's everything rests on this trial tomorrow. And Mr. Laurie broke down for the first time. Our banker, Mr. Laurie, very professional, very calm. He breaks down and he starts to cry. And I love this scene. You are a good man and a true friend, said Carton in an altered voice. Forgive me if I notice that you are affected. I could not see my father weep and sit by careless, and I could not respect your sorrow more if you were my father. You are free from that misfortune, however. I love that. Carton says nga, I would ignore you crying, but but it's I feel like a son watching his father cry. I need to say something. I need to do something. So basically, Carton is kind of calling Mr. Laurie kind of something like his father. And then he says, pag yun nga, although thankfully, you do not have that misfortune of really being my father. So we have the same issue no, of Carton being hating himself, but really loving everyone around him. He loves everyone, and he's not just in love. He is, I mean, he does love Lucy. We all know that, but he loves said good Mr. Laurie and sees him as a father, but doesn't see himself as being worthy of being Mr. Laurie's son. I love that paragraph. That paragraph alone is like I can talk about it forever. Though he said the last words with a slip into his usual manner, there was true feeling and respect both in his tone and in his touch that Mr. Laurie, who had never seen the better side of him, was wholly unprepared for. He gave him his hand, and Carton gently pressed it. To return to poor Darnay, said Carton, don't tell her of this interview or this arrangement. It would not enable her to go to see him. She might think it was contrived, in case of the worst, to convey to him the means of anticipating the sentence. Mr. Laurie had not thought of that, and he looked quickly at Carton to see if it were in his mind. It seemed to be he returned the look and evidently understood it. She might think 1,000 things, he said, and any of them would only add to her trouble. Don't speak of me to her. As I said to you when I first came, I had better not see her. I can put my hand out to do any little helpful work for her that my hand can find to do without that. You are going to her, I hope. She must be very desolate tonight. So he said, don't tell Lucy I'm here. Don't tell her that I'm trying to arrange something. Don't tell her about this meeting I can get if he is guilty. Don't tell her anything. I don't want her to think or be concerned about me or whatever I'm trying to do here. I am going now directly. I am glad of that. She has such a strong attachment to you and reliance on you. How does she look? Anxious and unhappy, but very beautiful. Ah. It was a long, grieving sound, like a sigh, almost like a sob. It attracted Mr. Laurie's eyes to Carton's face, which was turned to the fire. A light or a shade, the old gentleman could not have said which, passed from it as swiftly as a change will sweep over a hillside on a wild, bright day, and he lifted his foot to put back one of the little flaming logs, which was tumbling forward. He wore the white riding coat and top boots then in vogue, and the light of the fire touching their light surfaces made him look very pale. with his long brown hair all untrimmed hanging loose about him. His indifference to fire was sufficiently remarkable to elicit a word of remonstrance from Mr. Lorry. His boot was still upon the hot embers of the flaming log when it had broken under the weight of his foot. "I forget it," he said. Mr. Lorry's eyes were again attracted to his face, taking note of the wasted air which clouded the naturally handsome features, and having the expression of prisoners' faces fresh in his mind, he was strongly reminded of that expression. "And your duties here have drawn to an end, sir," said Carton, turning to him. "Yes, as I was telling you last night when Lucy came in so unexpectedly. I have at length done all that I can do here. I hope to have left them in perfect safety, and then to have quitted Paris. I have my leave to pass. I was ready to go." They were both silent. "Yours is a long life to look back upon, sir," said Carton wistfully. "I am in my 78th year." So Mr. Laurie's 78th year. Oh, I love this part because this is the one father-son moment that Carton gets in this whole book. And it's with Mr. Lorry, who we've known since the first ever second chapter, the first book, second chapter. We've met Mr. Lorry, and he turns out to be this father figure for our anti-hero, Sydney Carton. And he asked him, "You've had a long life, sir." And then Mr. Lorry was like 7 to 8 years. "You have been useful all your life, steadily and constantly occupied, trusted, respected, and looked up to. I have been a man of business ever since I have been a man. Indeed, I may say that I was a man of business when a boy. See what a place you fill at 78. How many people will miss you when you leave it empty?" "A solitary old bachelor," answered Mr. Lorry, shaking his head. "There is nobody to weep for me." "How can you say that? Wouldn't she weep for you? Wouldn't her child?" "Yes, yes, thank God. I didn't quite mean what I said. It is a thing to thank God for, is it not? Surely, surely. If you could say with truth to your own solitary heart tonight, 'I have secured to myself the love and attachment, the gratitude or respect of no human creature. I have won myself a tender place in no regard. I have done nothing good or serviceable to be remembered by,' your 78 years would be 78 heavy curses, would they not?" "You say truly, Mr. Carton, I think they would be." Sydney turned his eyes again upon the fire, and after a silence of a few moments said, "I should like to ask you, does your childhood seem far off? Do the days when you sat at your mother's knee seem days of very long ago?" Responding to his softened manner, Mr. Lorry answered, "20 years back, yes. At this time of my life, no. For as I draw closer and closer to the end, I travel in the circle, nearer and nearer to the beginning. It seems to be one of the kind smoothings and preparings of the way. My heart is touched now by many remembrances that had long fallen asleep of my pretty young mother, and I so old, and by many associations of the days when what we call the world was not so real with me, and my faults were not confirmed in me." "I understand the feeling," exclaimed Carton with a bright flush, "and you are the better for it?" "I hope so." Carton terminated the conversation here by rising to help him on with his outer coat. "But you," said Mr. Lorry, reverting to the theme, "you are young." "Yes," said Carton, "I am not old, but my young way was never the way to age. Enough of me." So Carton was like, "You've lived 78 years, but you've lived a very good life." And Mr. Lorry is like, "Not really. I don't have a family. I'm a bachelor." But he's like, "But Lucy would cry for you if you died. Her child would cry for you if you died. You lived, even if he didn't get married and have his own family, he lived a life." Mr. Lorry lived a life of service, of faithful service to Telsons, to his clients, to the Manettes, and Carton envies this. Carton is like, if you lived your whole life without doing good to anyone else, your life would be a curse. You would feel like your life was a curse. And Mr. Lorry said, yes, it would feel like a curse. And Carton's like, yes, it would. Carton sees that the way to live a life good is in service, in loving and faithful service for others good. And he sees this, and murag he regrets kayo nga, I wasted my youth good. My youth, I didn't spend for others. I spent it na on developing these bad habits good kaayo. "And of me, I am sure," said Mr. Lorry. "Are you going out? I'll walk with you to her gate. You know my vagabond and restless habits. If I should prowl about the streets a long time, don't be uneasy. I shall reappear in the morning. You go to the court tomorrow? Yes, unhappily. I shall be there, but only as one of the crowd. My spy will find a place for me. Take my arm, sir. Mr. Lorry did so, and they went downstairs and out in the streets. A few minutes brought them to Mr. Lorry's destination. Carton left him there, but lingered at a little distance and turned back to the gate again when it was shut, and touched it. He had heard of her going to the prison every day. She came out here, he said, looking about him. Turned this way, must have trod on these stones often. Let me follow in her steps. So that night, Carton's just kind of following the road that Lucy would have walked every day to visit Darnay. It's so heartbreaking. Like, oh, she touched this gate and then he touched the gate and she walked this road and then he walked. And then the reason why she touched the gate and walked the road was for another man. It was also so nice. Let me follow in her steps. It was 10 o'clock at night when he stood before the prison of the forest, where she had stood hundreds of times. A little wood sawyer, having closed his shop, was smoking his pipe at his shop door. Good night, citizen, said Sidney Carton, pausing and going by. For the man eyed him inquisitively. Good night, citizen. How goes the Republic? You mean the guillotine? Not ill, 63 today. We shall mount to 100 soon. Samson and his men complain sometimes of being exhausted. Ha ha, he is so droll, that Samson. Such a barber. Okay, so 63, that means 63 corpses. Samson the barber is the one who guillotines the people, the executioner. Do you often go to see him? Shave? Always, every day. What a barber. You have seen him at work? Never. Go and see him when he has a good batch. Figure this to yourself, citizen. He shaved the 63 today in less than 2 pipes. Less than 2 pipes, word of honor. As the grinning little man held out the pipe he was smoking to explain how he timed the executioner, Carton was so sensible of a rising desire to strike the life out of him that he turned away. But you are not English, said the wood sawyer, though you wear English dress. Yes, said Carton, pausing again and answering over his shoulder. You speak like a Frenchman. I am an old student here. Aha, perfect Frenchman. Good night, Englishman. Good night, citizen. But go and see that droll dog, the little man persisted, calling after him, and take a pipe with you. Sidney had not gone far out of sight when he stopped in the middle of the street under a glimmering lamp and wrote with his pencil on a scrap of paper. Then, traversing with the decided step of one who remembered the way well, several dark and dirty streets, much dirtier than usual, for the best public thoroughfares remained uncleansed in those times of terror. He stopped at a chemist's shop, which the owner was closing with his own hands. A small, dim, crooked shop kept in a tortuous uphill thoroughfare by a small, dim, crooked man. Giving the citizen too good night as he confronted him at his counter, he laid the scrap of paper before him. Whew, the chemist whistled softly as he read it. He, he, he. Sidney Carton took no heed, and the chemist said, For you, citizen? For me. You'll be careful to keep them separate, citizen. You know the consequences of mixing them. Perfectly. Certain small packets were made and given to him. He put them one by one in the breast of his inner coat, counted out the money for them, and deliberately left the shop. There is nothing more to do, said he, glancing upward at the moon. Until tomorrow, I can't sleep. Okay, so Carton visited the place where Lucy would stand every day to see Darnay. And he also visits, he saw the wood sawyer there. He also visits a chemist and he buys kind of certain chemicals. And the chemist was like, Make you know what this does, right? You know what these chemicals will do? And he was like, Yes, I know what they do. It was not a reckless manner, the manner in which he said these words aloud under the fast sailing clouds, nor was it more expressive of negligence than defiance. It was a settled manner of a tired man who had wandered and struggled and got lost, but who at length struck into his road and saw its end. Long ago, when he had been famous among his earliest competitors as a youth of great promise, he had followed his father to the grave. His mother had died years before. These solemn words, which had been read at his father's grave, arose in his mind as he went down the dark streets among the heavy shadows with the moon and the clouds sailing on high above him. I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live, and whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. In a city dominated by the axe, alone at night, with natural sorrow rising in him for the 63 who had been that day put to the death, and for tomorrow's victims then awaiting their doom in the prisons, and still of tomorrows and tomorrows, the chain of association that brought the words home like a rusty old ship's anchor from the deep might have been easily found. He did not seek it, but repeated them and went on. With a solemn interest in the lighted windows where the people were going to rest, forgetful through a few calm hours of the horror surrounding them in the towers of the churches where no prayers were said, for the popular revulsion had even traveled that length of self-destruction from years of priestly impostors, plunderers, and profligates, in the distant burial places reserved as they wrote upon the gates for eternal sleep, in the abounding goals and in the streets along which the 60s rolled to a death which had become so common and material that no sorrowful story of a haunting spirit ever arose among the people out of all the working of the guillotine. With a solemn interest in the whole life and death of the city settling down to its sharp nightly pause in fury, Sydney Carton crossed the Seine again for the lighter streets. Few coaches were abroad for riders. So this is really the second part of this chapter. After this beautiful moment with Laurie and Carton, we have this scene of Carton just wandering the streets of Paris the night before Darnay's trial. And he's just kind of walking around and thinking and pondering. It's a very quiet chapter, which I love. Few coaches were abroad, for riders and coaches were liable to be suspected, and gentility hid its head in red nightcaps and put on heavy shoes and trudged. But the theatres were all well filled, and the people poured cheerfully out as he passed, and went chatting home. At one of the theatre doors, there was a little girl with a mother looking for a way across the street through the mud. He carried the child over, and before the timid arm was loose from his neck, asked her for a kiss. So he's walking around, and then there's this mother with a child, and they were walking, and the streets were very muddy, and so Carton offered to carry the child so she wouldn't get muddy, and then he walked her over the mud, and he put her down, and then he asked for a kiss before he would let her go, and then she kissed his cheek. And I don't know, Carton's such a nice guy. This is the same Carton, right? From like, you know, alcoholic Sydney Carton. He's turning into this very kind guy who realizes that he wants to live his life for other people. And even this moment, I love this moment. And he kind of carries a child and brings her across mud and asks for a kiss. It just shows what a good character Carton is. I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live, and whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Now that the streets were quiet and the night wore on, the words were in the echoes of his feet and were in the air. Perfectly calm and steady, he sometimes repeated them to himself as he walked, but he heard them always. So he kept repeating this verse, I am the resurrection and the life, over and over again that night. The night wore out, and as he stood upon the bridge listening to the water as it splashed the river walls of the island of Paris, where the picturesque confusion of houses and cathedrals shone bright in the light of the moon, the day came coldly, looking like a dead face out of the sky. Then the night, with the moon and the stars, turned pale and died, and for a little while it seemed as if creation were delivered over to death's dominion. But the glorious sun rising seemed to strike those words, that burden of the night, straight and warm to his heart. In its long bright rays, and looking along them with reverently shaded eyes, a bridge of light appeared to span the air between him and the sun, while the river sparkled under it. The strong tide, so swift, so deep and certain, was like a congenial friend. In the morning stillness he walked by the stream, far from the houses, and in the light and warmth of the sun fell asleep on the bank. So he fell asleep by the river. When he awoke and was afoot again, he lingered there yet a little longer, watching an eddy that turned and turned purposeless until the stream absorbed it and carried it on to the sea, like me. A trading boat with a sail of the softened color of a dead leaf then glided into his view, floated by him and died away. As its silent track in the water disappeared, the prayer that had broken up out of his heart for a merciful consideration of all his poor blindness and errors ended in the words, I am the resurrection and the life. Mr. Lorry was already out when he got back, and it was easy to surmise where the good old man was gone. Sydney Carton drank nothing but a little coffee, ate some bread, and having washed and changed to refresh himself, went out to the place of trial. Okay, so it's after that very quiet chapter of Carton just walking around and turning into a hero. okay, in the inside. We have the trial. So it's a big day. So we had a very quiet moment before all the drama of the trial will take place. And remember, the number one question right now is who is the third witness? Who is the third person accusing Darnay? Okay, because we know it's Defarge, we know it's Madame Defarge. We don't know who this third mystery accuser is. The court was all astir and abuzz when the black sheep, who many fell away from in dread, pressed him into an obscure corner among the crowd. Mr. Lorry was there, and Dr. Manette was there. She was there, sitting beside her father. When her husband was brought in, she turned a look upon him so sustaining, so encouraging, so full of admiring love and pitying tenderness, yet so courageous for his sake that it called the healthy blood into his face, brightened his glance, and animated his heart. If there had been any eyes to notice the influence of her look on Sydney Carton, it would have been seen to be the same influence exactly. So Lucy looked at Darnay, and when Darnay saw her, murag hope flooded back into him. And Carton, although she wasn't looking at him, the same effect happened to Carton. Said good nga murag he stood up straight rin, murag siya na full of hope. And she wasn't even looking at him. He was just looking at her. Before that unjust tribunal, there was little or no order of procedure, ensuring to any accused person any reasonable hearing. There could have been no such revolution if all laws, forms, and ceremonies had not first been so monstrously abused that the suicidal vengeance of the revolution was to scatter them all to the winds. Every eye was turned to the jury, the same determined patriots and good Republicans as yesterday, and the day before, and tomorrow, and the day after, eager and prominent among them. One man with a craving face and his fingers perpetually hovering about his lips, Jacques Three, we know that, whose appearance gave great satisfaction to the spectators. A life-thirsting, cannibal-looking, bloody-minded juryman, the Jacques Three of Saint Antoine, the whole jury as a jury of dogs impaneled to try the deer. Every eye then turned to the 5 judges and the public prosecutor, no favorable leaning in that quarter today, a fell, uncompromising, murderous business meaning there. Every eye then sought some other eye in the crowd and gleamed at it approvingly, and heads nodded at one another before bending forward with a strained attention. Charles Evermond called Darnay, released yesterday, reaccused and retaken yesterday. Indictment delivered to him last night, suspected and denounced enemy of the Republic. Aristocrat, one of a family of tyrants, one of a race prescribed for that they had used their abolished privileges to the infamous oppression of the people. Charles Evermond called Darnay in right of such prescription absolutely dead in law. So they're reading out the charges. He's a traitor, he's a tyrant, he's from a family of traitors and tyrants. He was freed yesterday. He was reaccused and he's being retried again. Okay? Okay. Oh my gosh. To this effect, in as few or fewer words, the public prosecutor. The president asked, was the accused openly denounced or secretly? Openly, President. Okay, pause for a while. Okay. So they're going to reveal now the accusers. Okay? So it said like, okay, who did the accusing? All right? By whom? 3 voices. Ernest Defarge, wine vendor of Saint Antoine. We knew that. Okay. Good. Therese Defarge, his wife. Good. Alexander Manette, physician. A great uproar took place in the court, and in the midst of it, Dr. Manette was seen pale and trembling, standing where he had been seated. So the third witness, the third accuser, is Dr. Manette. Let that shake you lang sa. So the third, the mystery guy who's calling Darnay a traitor and calling Darnay a tyrant is Dr. Manette. Oh my gosh. And then the crowd went wild, obviously. President, I indignantly protest to you that this is a forgery and a fraud. You know the accused to be the husband of my daughter. My daughter and those dear to her are far dearer to me than my life. Who and where is the false conspirator who says that I denounced the husband of my child? So Dr. Manette's freaking out. He's like, who? This is a false. I did not. I am not accusing him. Citizen Manette, be tranquil. To fail in submission to the authority of the tribunal would be to put yourself out of law. As to what is dearer to you than life, nothing can be so dear to a good citizen as the Republic. Loud acclamations hailed this rebuke. The president rang his bell and with warmth resumed. If the Republic should demand of you the sacrifice of your child herself, you would have no duty but to sacrifice her. Listen to what is to follow. In the meanwhile, be silent. Frantic acclamations were again raised. Dr. Manette sat down with his eyes looking around and his lips trembling. His daughter drew closer to him. The craving man of the jury rubbed his hands together and restored the usual hand to his mouth. Defarge was produced when the court was quiet enough to admit of his being heard, and rapidly expounded the story of the imprisonment and of his having been a mere boy in the doctor's service, and of the release and of the state of the prisoner when released and delivered to him. This short explanation followed, for the court was quick with its work. You did good service at the taking of the Bastille, citizen. I believe so. Here an excited woman screeched from the crowd. You were one of the best patriots there. Why not say so? You were a cannoneer that day there, and you were among the first to enter the accursed fortress when it fell. Patriots, I speak the truth. Okay, so they asked Defarge that you know Dr. Manette, and Defarge was like, yes, I was his servant when I was a little boy. When I grew up, he got released from the prison. I was the one who took him in. We know this is true, right, guys? We know this is true. And then they said, you were also when you were there when the Bastille fell. And then he was like, yes. And then a woman stood up and was like, you were the best fighter there. It was the Vengeance who, amidst the warm commendations of the audience, thus assisted the proceedings. The president rang his bell, but the Vengeance, warming with encouragement, shrieked, I defy that bell, wherein she was likewise much commended. So she was like, you're the best, Defarge. And yeah, people were like freaking out, and they were like, quiet, quiet. And then she was like, they were ringing a bell to keep her quiet, and she was like, I defy that bell. And the people went wild again. Inform the tribunal of what you did that day within the Bastille. What do you remember, guys? Okay, we know the chapter, right? We read the chapter together where they were storming the Bastille. What did Defarge do? Do you remember what he did? He found the doctor's prison cell, which he knew because the doctor kept repeating it as his identity. And then he was looking for something, right? He put his hand up the chimney. He felt for something. He pretended like he didn't find any. He said he didn't find anything. I knew, said Defarge, looking down at his wife, who stood at the bottom of the steps on which he was raised, looking steadily up at him. I knew that this prisoner of whom I speak had been confined in a cell known as 105 North Tower. I knew it from himself. He knew himself by no other name than 105 North Tower when he made shoes under my care. As I serve my gun that day, I resolve, when the place shall fall, to examine that cell. It falls. I mount to the cell with a fellow citizen who is one of the jury. Directed by a gaoler, I examine it very closely. In a hole in the chimney where a stone has been worked out and replaced, I find a written paper. This is that written paper. I have made it my business to examine some specimens of the writing of Dr. Manette. This is the writing of Dr. Manette. I confide this paper in the writing of Dr. Manette to the hands of the president. So he found something in the chimney. It was a piece of paper that was written by Dr. Manette while he was a prisoner in the Bastille. Let it be read. In a dead silence and stillness, the prisoner under trial, looking lovingly at his wife only looking from him to look with solicitude at her father, Dr. Manette keeping his eyes fixed on the reader, Madame Defarge never taking hers from the prisoner, Defarge never taking his from his feasting wife, and all the other eyes there intent upon the doctor, who saw none of them. The paper was read as follows. So cool. And then that last paragraph. In a dead silence and stillness, so it's quiet. The prisoner under trial looking lovingly at his wife. Darnay's looking at his wife only looking from him to look with solicitude at her father. Okay, so Darnay's looking at Lucy. Lucy's looking at her father and then at Darnay, and then at her father and then at Darnay. Dr. Manette keeping his eyes fixed on the reader. Okay, so Dr. Manette is looking at the one reading the letter. All right, Madame Defarge never taking hers from the prisoner. Madame Defarge is looking at Darnay. Okay, Defarge never taking his from his feasting wife. Defarge is looking at Madame Defarge. Okay, and all the other eyes are intent upon the doctor, who saw none of them. Everyone else was looking at the doctor. The paper was read as follows, and then that's chapter 10, The Substance of the Shadow, one of the best chapters ever, because it is the letter of the doctor, not the writing of the doctor that he wrote while he was a prisoner in the Bastille. And it will reveal things. Okay? Next chapter.